Hi, I'm Debra Green. I'm the founding director of ROC, Redeeming Our Communities. We're a community engagement charity. I'm also a member of Ivy Church in Manchester, and I'm on the Spring Harvest Planning Group. And I'm going to share with you today a lesson from Luke's Gospel. It's the feeding of the 5,000 found in Luke chapter 9. But this is the only miracle that's recorded in all four Gospels, apart from the resurrection of Jesus. So it's a really important message for us. And I'm calling this the lesson of the loaves, which is a phrase Mark uses to describe the lesson that the disciples needed to learn from this particular miracle. We'll come back to that in a minute, but let's read together from Luke chapter 9, verses 12 to 17. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so that they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we're in a remote place here." He replied, "You give them something to eat." They answered, "We only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd." About 5,000 men were there. But he said to the disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." The disciples did so, and everyone sat down. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. What an incredible story. Over the last 40 years, there's been a real maturing of understanding about what mission is all about, what Christian mission is. Back when I became a Christian, around about 40 years ago, there was a polarisation of views. On the one hand, there were what people would call liberal Christians who believed in the social gospel, and the important thing for them was about feeding the poor as an expression of their love for Christ. On the other end of the spectrum, you had the evangelicals, or the conservative evangelical churches in particular, who stressed the importance of preaching the word. It was all about preaching the word rather than these acts of social action or the social gospel. It was almost an insult to use that phrase, the social gospel. And it's incredible that over time and over these last 40 years or so, there's been a real understanding in the church that the word and deed are to come together, that they are both equal expressions of the gospel. And the best expression of all is when the word and deed work hand in hand. And people like John Stott, great Christian leader, spoke about this in the 1980s, and he talked about this marriage, if you like, of the word and deed as being equal partners in the gospel. And one of the quotes that he said was, "There will be times when a person's material need is so pressing that he would not be able to hear the gospel if we shared it with him. The man who fell among robbers needed above all else at that moment oil and bandages for his wounds, not evangelistic tracts for his pockets." So it's wonderful really that we've moved into this expression of understanding of word and deed together. And its very simplest form, this miracle shows the importance of meeting people's felt needs. Why did Jesus feed 5,000 plus people? Simple answer is because they were hungry. He recognised that they needed something to eat. And not only that, he wanted the disciples to participate. If he were the one who was solely responsible for the miracle, He didn't need to involve his disciples when he said, "You give them something to eat." There was a lesson being learned for them in their progress as early disciples of Jesus, learning how to trust him, learning how to express faith. And I love the fact that in the UK we have picked up this mantle, as it were, this commission to feed hungry people as part of our faith. We've got wonderful ministries like Trussell Trust with food banks across the UK, and sadly I've been hearing that families going hungry has increased by 50% during this lockdown period, and there's such serious need that around about 1/5 of all households in the UK are struggling in some way. There's wonderful ministries like Christians Against Poverty, CAP, our friend John Kirkby and his team doing pioneering work, partnering with 600 churches, 600 centres across this nation, helping people with issues of debt, their felt needs, relieving their debt. 23,000 people a year being ministered to through that programme, not only debt relief but help into employment through job clubs. It's the reason why we as ROC work with churches across the country in all sorts of social action projects to show the community that we love them and that we care. We have an amazing project over in Blackpool called ROC Gardens, which is now sprouting up in other parts of the country as well. And James Baker and his team have pioneered this project where they take a group of people, volunteers, train them up in gardening skills, go into people's homes. Often their gardens are overgrown, some of them are living in social housing, they've got maybe health issues or reasons why they can't fix their own garden, and you get these amazing before and after pictures of transformation. Not only that, a lot of the people who work on that project are unemployed, some of them are homeless, they're learning gardening skills, and 80% of those volunteers now have paid employment. It's just wonderful to see the way God softens hearts through the church meeting their need. And I'd love to see that happening more and more, particularly in this difficult time that we're facing as a nation. So in its very simplest form, this message about feeding the 5,000 is about meeting people's needs. You feed them, Jesus said. He wanted to teach them a lesson of how to participate with his miracle. But there's a deeper message here, there's a deeper meaning here in terms of their process of discipleship for these young disciples. Immediately after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus goes to pray on the mountain, and at the same time, these same men who've seen the feeding of the 5,000 miracle get into a boat and cross the lake to go to Bethesda. And Mark records this for us in Mark chapter 6, that they face a storm as they're crossing the lake and they become terrified. The boat is rocking and they're fearful for their lives. It's a terrifying situation for them. And then made worse, they see Jesus, or who they think is a ghost, walking towards them on the water. They don't quite recognise who it is. So they're even more terrified now. And Jesus, of course, calms the storm. And he gets into the boat with the disciples to just comfort them. And Mark, as it were, steps out of the narrative at this point to make an observation. He's seen something. in the previous miracle relating to this particular time of this storm in the boat. And he makes the point, for they had not understood the lesson of the loaves. What is this lesson of the loaves that they'd not understood? Well, a few hours earlier, they'd seen Jesus feed probably 10,000 people from a few loaves and fish. He's prayed over the food, he's multiplied it. He's not only fed all of these people, this vast crowd in the desert, he has done it with 12 baskets left over. It's a massive deal, it's a massive miracle. It must have had a significant impact in the lives of the disciples, yet here they are a few hours later being tossed around in the storm on the sea and seeing what they think is a ghost coming towards them, walking on the lake. Incredible. But they have not learned something from that previous miracle. There's something that they've missed in the miracle that Jesus did in that wilderness place when he fed all those hungry people. And this is why Mark says they've not understood the lesson of the loaves. So the lesson of the loaves is about their faith should have been stretched. Their faith levels should have risen because of what they've seen Jesus do previously, so that when the storm hits the boat, they understand that Jesus has the power over the storm, just as he has the power to multiply food. But they haven't related it. Maybe they trust Jesus can multiply food, but they can't trust Jesus to calm the storm. Now, I'm exactly the same as that. We could be very critical of the disciples for not understanding the lesson of the loaves, but I'm just the same. When I look back over my life, I've experienced a number of significant, what you can only call miracles. Miracles of healing, miracles of provision, miracles of strength to do something that I can't do in my own strength, miracles in relationships. So many miracles. In fact, I've written a whole book about it, of Rock Your World and Miracles of Transformation, where God has done awesome things in our ministry. But here we are, the next day, when a crisis occurs in my life, and I can't trust Jesus for what he's done before. I can't remember his power from that time he was so powerfully at work in my life. I don't allow the lesson of the loaves to really do what it needs to do in my heart, to trust him, and not only trust that he is present in the storm, but that I can have that same faith to speak to the storm to be still, that I can say that prayer in the name of Jesus. The lesson of the loaves, something to take away with us, to really examine, are we going to trust Jesus in this season where the storms of our life are around us?